Hi everyone, Bill Beryl here, and welcome to Culture Road Podcast, a show that explores issues that shape our culture today. Today is our first show of 2021, and joining me as always are my co-hosts, Angela Mosley and George Orwel. Hello guys, Happy New Year.
Hello, how are you doing, Phil?
Happy New Year. I like that.
Happy New Year to you all.
And we have a guest this morning to join us, Harry Spikes, who joins us from Maryland, from Baltimore, correct, Harry?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How you doing, Phil?
Harry served for 15 years as a top aide to the late Congressman Elijah Cummings of Baltimore, and he currently is newly appointed executive director for Bon Secours Community Works in West Baltimore, where he oversees a budget of over $7 million to provide housing, workforce development, urban farming, and early head start to low-income families. So, glad to have you aboard.
Well, thank you so much, Phil. Happy to be here.
The topic of today's discussion was going to be civics, and not for the first time, and probably not for the last. We've been blindsided by current events, but I do think that we will be able to find a way. I can think of several ways that we can tie in those events to the topic of discussion. Let me start by saying that one of the events that occurred yesterday, perhaps two of the more positive events, I would say. That people are kind of like forgetting about in discussing everything else. But one event obviously was that after all the chaos, Joseph R. Biden Jr. was formally certified as the next president of the United States. The other being that in Georgia, both races. Yes, that's right. We have the election of Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff to the United States Senate. Not only both Democrats, therefore changing the balance of power in the United States Senate, but significant milestones. The first Black man elected to a southern state. I should say first Democrat, because we have Senator Scott of South Carolina.
Right.
And also, to a lesser degree, the fact that Mr. Ossoff is Jewish, and that's also something that you wouldn't think of happening in a deep South state as recently as 20 years ago. So those were things and those elections, as all the coverage is made clear, would not have happened except for the tireless efforts of an extraordinary group of activists, primarily Black women, led by the unbelievable Stacey Abrams, in getting so many people to the polls, in organizing and getting out the vote. And that is one example of what's often described as civics participation, I would say. And at the same time, the certification of Joe Biden, there's a cliche I think the media always likes to trot out, that that process was a civics lesson for the American people. They said it after the Watergate scandal, after the impeachments of Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. Whenever you have these processes that go on that don't usually occur, the press always says it's a civics lesson for the American people. But what do we mean exactly by civics? I think a lot of people, especially in using that cliche, we have the assumption that it just means the workings of politics and government. And the truth is, it's a lot more than that. I happen to look up online the Webster's definition, and it says, civics is a social science dealing with the rights and duties of citizens. I also found an interesting quote from an educator in Ohio named Ed Jones, who wrote, civics is so much more than US government and politics. It's the way you look at your street as either the mayor's or as your family's. It's whether you pick up some litter in the park your kids play in or leave it be. It's going to a school information meeting, even when you have no kids in the system, and serving pancakes at a pancake breakfast so you can meet the local leaders and politicians who come to hang out. In other words, civics in the classic sense is not just about how the professional politicians or government leaders carry out their duties. It's about the role of the citizen in interacting with them, in keeping them honest, if you will. I think a lot of people talk about one reason we've had so much chaos and polarization over the last 4 years, and even before that, is that there's been a breakdown in kind of that understanding in civics, that more and more people, for different reasons of different political persuasions, feel alienated from the workings of government. You know, they don't see themselves as citizens. They don't see themselves as having any kind of stake in the system. And I think that, you know, obviously there are a lot of reasons for that. Everything's been cited from like poor civics education in schools or a lack of it to, you know, the rise of social media and media appealing to certain segments of the population at the expense of others, and lack of a shared sense of common purpose and all that. So I would just throw out that question as to what any of you think about that, as to, you know, why do we have such a maybe a lack of civics, so to speak, in this country, and what can maybe be done to repair it? Harry, you want to take that first? I'll put you on the spot.
Sure, all means. No, it's okay. You know, let me first say this. When I think as an African-American man, for me, I was raised watching the show called Eyes on the Prize, right? And so my mom and dad made me sit down and watch this. But the part that they made sure I did not miss were the African-American men and women who were dressed like they were going to church on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and Saturdays,
Yes.
marching so that they could have just the right to vote, because they understood the advantage and the power of local politicians, and that local politician turning into national politicians, and those national politicians turning into presidents. But the irony of them telling me to watch that is I saw canines, which we all love, being inflicted on them, beaten, and they were bitten by dogs and by police officers. And so, and then finally, you hear stories of the late, great John Lewis, where he said there were people that walked for miles to go to school, right? So his precursor to even walking was like, I can do it because I walked for miles to go to school, so I definitely could march for the right to vote. So for me, as a young man, it is my duty to make sure that, one, the vote is upheld, two, the right is maintained, and three, I get up and vote, right? That's just my civic duty outside of just the laws and the rights. It's just, what can I do individually? And I think in reference to your question, what's lost is history. I think you do not have, you have a generation who has the access to the technology that we don't have, that we didn't have. But the access that they have now is utilized in a very weird way. Everyone can have all type of media outlets, and people get their information all type of ways. And then on top of that, they choose what they want to believe. But every young person I talk to, I make sure I say, have you ever heard of Eyes on the Prize? And 99.9% of them
Don't know what it is.
tell me they don't know what I'm talking about. And I say, man, just go on YouTube, because I love YouTube. I'm a fan of YouTube. I learned how to cook off of YouTube, so I'm a fan. Go on YouTube and just do that, and you'll see folks that you respect, John, that you heard about, that you grew to respect, John Lewis, Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, a plethora of men and women. Coretta Scott King was even on a couple marches with her husband, where they were in, violence was inflicted upon them for us to have the right to vote. So I just want to tailor it to that. For me, just visually, without me having to read anything, I have to have the civic engagement to tell folks, hey, vote. Hey, this is the reason why. And most importantly, folks died who had my skin complexion to vote. So we had the right so we would have the right to be treated as human beings.
And Phil, I would like to add to what Harry said and even take it a step further back. He stated that his parents set him down. What is lost is the fact that the home structure has been lost. The fact that his parents set him down and had this conversation with him and told him this is what it is. We don't have that with a lot of young people nowadays. Because for many different reasons, we have most parents working 2 and 3 jobs just to keep up. And then the children are being schooled and educated by social media. So it starts, I think, with the adults in our lives. It starts with those mentors and those supporters in our lives to tell us what civic engagement is about, what community is about, what our responsibilities as citizens, first to ourselves, but then to others, what that means.
Exactly right.
Mhm.
Exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
think
do
both of
think
you.
that, sorry, Rich,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
What all of you actually have said is correct, and I've always been talking about a book that I read from Anna Arendt, which was that Alec goes to Jerusalem. And one thing that I took out of that, which I've actually has been part of my life, is I think there's a word that has been used, engagement. But that word was participation, because you can never be part of a society to which you don't participate. You can't be there emotionally. You can't be responsible, because if you participate, then you're going to be responsible. And participation means, yes, the mechanical aspects of it, going to church, being aware of your neighborhood, and being with the community, going to church, and helping people. But it also means that you have to think, because to do all of those things, you have to think of what is good, what is bad, right and wrong. And there is in life this dichotomy of between the left and the right, what is wrong and what is right. And you have to have that thinking to be able to delineate what is right and what is wrong. Part of that thinking is that within your house, within your family, you do not necessarily have to follow what they're saying without you having your input. But it also gives us this responsibility as parents to be able to understand that we have to culture this. We have to inculcate some of these issues from the time the kids are young. I know I have a son who has, I have to tell him so many things, be able to get him to be interested in civics, to be able to get him to be interested in what is going on around him, because YouTube is and Netflix now, and the binge watching of these shows that totally creates a different sphere of life, a different world in which they can do whatever they want. And in this case, if you take it down to what has been going on down in Washington, these case, people are in their own world. They are not looking for information themselves. They're looking at things that have been fed to them. And so their engagement, their participation, and their thinking is challenged. And that's where we go wrong.
Yeah, no, there is a lack of, as I said, we have these bubbles, we have this lack of competing information, as it were. And I would add also that, the thing about some of the enabling of Donald Trump over the last 4 years, I think that, regardless of, even if we say that the people who rioted yesterday were the most extreme faction, the fact remains that even after that, there were several United States senators, Raphael Edward Cruz of Texas, Joshua Hawley of Missouri. Those were like the ringleaders. Then there were several others who joined them and still voted, I think 6 or 7, to invalidate the results from Arizona and or Pennsylvania in the election. They didn't change their minds about that. And I mention this because, I think we can all agree there's complicity in the upper echelons of the Republican Party in what happened yesterday. And part of what I've noticed in that complicity, that enabling, is this constant dismissal of some of the things that Trump did that were clearly in violation of the Constitution. Now, I don't, condone their dismissing it, but I understand in a sense where they were coming from. They knew that their constituents would not give a damn about that. And I think part of the reason is not simply that so many of those people were worshiping Donald Trump. It's that there was a sense, and I heard this even, among people who were not necessarily Trump worshipers, this idea of like, so what, so he made a phone call to the president of Ukraine. So what? So he violated this thing called the Hatch Act during the convention by using the White House as a political prop. So what? There was this lack of understanding of why these things were bad. And that's something I think I'll throw this out here again, but I wonder if that we can tie this into this lack of understanding of, again, this lack of civics here, that there are many Americans of all political stripes who don't really understand why certain things are not okay, even if they're not, explicitly codified in the law. And is this, how do we kind of address this deficit or something that makes these things don't happen again in the future?
Well, Phil, I have no problem tackling that. I remember when I was in college, many of you have seen his books, seen him on TV. I remember the first time I met a gentleman by the name of Tavis Smiley. And he was a gentleman that was really big on the African-American experience and how we get low-income families, individuals out of poverty and getting them education and opportunities, et cetera. There was a young student that raised their hand and they said, Mr. Smiley asked, they said, Mr. Smiley, can you tell us how we can be effective leaders to help people who are dealing with the Black experience? And the first thing he said, I'll never forget, and I walk with it every day of my life. He said, you can't help our people if you don't love our people. That's the first thing. I say that because as you mentioned in my bio, I was with the Congressman for 15 years. And I had the honor of walking through the Capitol with him. I've actually been in the office of Nancy Pelosi and other officers, and it was just amazing. And the reason I say that is because when they broke in there and broke 200-year-old glass, broke doors that were over 300 years old, I felt like somebody went into my high school that I don't attend anymore and vandalized it. And you know why? Because I have a connection and I love democracy. I respect difference in opinion and I respect that people have perspective. But what you saw yesterday was three things. One, you have people that do not love people. You don't do that if you love people. There were people in that room. Take politics out of it. In that building were people, mothers and fathers and uncles and brothers and sisters that somebody in other states loved. And they went in there and they were afraid for their life. We had United States congressmen and women ducking. That's number one. Number two, you trespassed.
Yeah.
You trespassed. You trespassed. You walked in somebody's spot and you violated them and you violated their protection. And finally, number three, when you were in there, you were very disrespectful. You put your feet and your body in places where they shouldn't have been. So when you talk, Phil, about how do we get people to that, once again, take out the processes, take out the Constitution, take out who's elected in office. If you don't love people, I can't reach you. I can't reach you. And so for me, and I have to say this for the sake of conversation, because yes, I am a Black man. I know for certain, had it been 14 brothers, right?
Would have been
if we rolled up,
Yeah.
all of us have been dead.
Yep.
Dead. But for some strange reason, this complexion doesn't get the respect it deserves. So when you have sisters, such as in Georgia, helping to change democracy, and you say, could those sisters possibly go up to DC and do what those men did? Or Black men down in Georgia come up and do what those men did? Oh no, we'd have a different conversation today. So that's why I mentioned Stacey Abrams right now, because she knew, like Dr. King knew, we're only going to get through this world by doing this non-violently and doing this the right way. And that's why we got those victories in Georgia. But I can honestly tell you, I don't even know the woman well, but I know she loves people because of what she did. And I know she loves democracy. So back to and I'll end how I began, Phil. You're not going to be able to have those conversations with individuals such as that if their foundation is not love. If your foundation is not love, it don't matter if I give you a salad as the appetizer, chicken sandwich as the entree, and a brownie as a dessert? Your stomach not even ready to eat it. Your stomach not even ready to eat it. So that's all I have to say about that.
No, Harry, I totally agree, and thank you for that. And I think, yeah, we have seen some of this in the media, and there has to be a lot more about the double standard, why at least some of the cops in the Capitol kind of practically invited the protesters to come in, took selfies with them. And absolutely, there's such a contrast with the way law enforcement behaved when nonviolent, peaceful protesters were in front of the White House back in July over George Floyd and police brutality. I mean, there is no question. There is an absolute double standard, and it's disgusting. Now, but getting back to, and some of the things you said, I think we should talk about this. I think this is the gorilla, the elephant in the room here. The fact is that race is very much at the heart of what happened yesterday. You can't deny it. I mean, some of them were waving Confederate flags, and there is clearly, I think, and in fact, leading up to that, the attempts to discredit the election results. Why did Trump focus on Detroit, Michigan, Atlanta, Georgia, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania? He knew exactly what he was doing. So did Giuliani and all of his enablers there. This is fact. This is a fact that can't be denied. And but it's the problem is, and again, it goes back to what you could call civic participation. One could almost argue in a very like dark, malevolent kind of way that these people in the Capitol yesterday, this was their version of civic participation. They were saying like, hey, I want to get involved here. I feel this election was stolen, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you can have positive civic participation, which is what, Stacey Abrams encouraged and John Lewis and so many other people. But what happens when on the other side, their view of civic participation is, this horrific event that happened? And I mean, wrapping it up here, and what I'm trying to say is, I guess, it seems like this is infecting the polarization here affects even the language that we use. And even a term like civic participation can be so perverted that somebody who stormed the Capitol yesterday could be saying, well, I'm getting involved in government. I'm having a say in what
my duty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's like, okay, and I don't know, I don't have an answer to that when the realities are so separate that.
The reality is based on the information you're getting. And I feel like civic participation not only means that you have to do what you have to do, but it also means you have to do what you have to do from an understanding. So you cannot, for example, come up with lies or base your action on lies. And in this case, these guys, number one, they are basically relying on lies from Trump without doing their own research, getting different opinions from various places. And so they rely on lies, and that brings a lot of problems. Their actions are not based on reality. And you cannot actually have a good conversation if you do not share a worldview based on certain basic facts that you can stipulate. I think the disgrace that we saw in the action or inaction of some of the security forces, and particularly the Capitol Police, who are under the auspices of the federal government, is more dangerous going forward. I say this because a week or two ago, I read a story that Joe Biden has decided that he is going to get the Secret Service personnel who used to be with him when he was vice president. And this was something that has never happened because he does not trust the current echelon of the Secret Service.
Yeah.
And one of the most egregious things that happened was that one of the mid-level leaders of the Secret Service organization was doubling as Trump's deputy chief of staff. And he was going back and forth from politics to security, from politics to security. Now, the Secret Service is supposed to be nonpartisan. The swear to defend whoever is there. And once you've slipped into being in politics, then you can't go back. Now, that was a case of one person flipping from being a Secret Service official to being a deputy chief of staff. And a lot of them actually have been known to be doing political jobs outside of their regular security jobs for Trump. So if you have politicized, and I know a lot of police officers across, police departments across the country are politicized, but in this case, this is a bad one. If you politicize police service within the Capitol and the Secret Service, then you see what is going on. They don't come to the job. They allowed what happened yesterday to occur. And if you're a new administration coming and you don't have confidence in these people, then that's a big problem. So we have to talk about the degradation of institutions that previously were supposed to be upright and good. A lot of people rely on them. And so the issue of skin color is really, really problematic within the United States, and particularly this government. And I think there's a reason why life in the United States with regards to race relations is so different from any other country. And that is because it is a life and death situation. When you consider somebody not as a fellow citizen, but as an enemy all the time, then you stop to think. When you stop to think, you're not going to be participating in civic duties well. That's why I just think that it's a long road going forward, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a heck of a job to do.
Yeah, no, this is clearly this is not over, and as much as we can, as I say, celebrate the positive aspects of yesterday, we have to be aware of that. I happen to be my older son, and this sort of goes back to what we were saying before about like kind of parents educating their kids and so forth. I've tried to have those kinds of conversations with my two teenage sons. Being a bit of a politics junkie myself, it wasn't that hard for me to do. And my older son, being rebellious as kids are at that age, sometimes doesn't agree with every single thing that I say. I mean, he's not pro-Trump, but he sometimes feels like, you like are automatically anti-Trump. You don't give him any credit for anything and so forth. And we've had discussions about this, and he also tries to look at other sources other than, say, the Times and MSNBC and so forth. So last night, for example, we were looking at CNN's coverage, and he switched over to Fox. I said, okay. And it happened to be Laura Ingraham on at that point. And, and I guess I was kind of curious in a way myself to see how can she possibly rationalize this? What kind of take can she put on it? And it was very interesting. She did condemn the violence and the invasion of the Capitol, but then she turns around, and one of her guests does this too and says, talk about double standards. Now she's, of course, repeating the lie that the majority of Black Lives Matter protests last year were violent. And so she's like, where was the media talking about this? What, when people, invaded these cities and burned buildings and blah, blah, blah. But then to close, this is what I'm getting to. In her closing statement, she did acknowledge Trump lost. I mean, it was a more in sorrow than anger kind of thing. But she went on to say, in effect, that kind of the fight goes on. She said something like, I'll try to paraphrase here. Losing is never easy, but, losing is not forever. And let's look back on the great record of the past 4 years and how our president stood up to China and blah, 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 blah. And, our movement continues. We know that our movement to make this a free, a more free country, a stronger country will continue. So take heart in that, basically saying in effect, I'm not going away. Hannity is not going away. Carlson and Limbaugh and that whole gang are not going away. OAN, that network that's even more to the right of Fox, is not going away. They are still there. they're still putting out their information. And it is something we will have to deal with. And I think, you know, I think the problem is, again, you talk about civics again, you talk about like citizens having responsibilities and saying, this is what I want. I want to get involved in this democracy because these are the results that I want. But what happens when one large group of people, the results that they want are polar opposites from what another large group, hopefully the majority, want, and how you reconcile those things? I mean, the first step, obviously, I think, is to go and have a thorough house cleaning of law enforcement and finally take seriously right-wing terrorism in this country and stop acting like, you know, if a brown-skinned man with a funny name commits a bombing or a shooting, that's terrorism. But if some guy in a MAGA hat and Confederate flag shoots up a synagogue, well, you know, that's like a lone wolf kind of thing. We have to recognize it for what it is. But then we have to go further and say, what motivates people to do that? What motivates people to look at OAN because they think that Fox is too liberal? And, you know, and I have no answer to that, because in some cases people want something that we cannot give them, that the government shouldn't give them, which is, you know, supremacy of one group over others. But I guess the question is, I'll wrap up here. Are there some people who can be reached because that's not the only thing that motivates them? Are they motivated more by their factory where they worked and their fathers worked was, you know, the company outsourced it to Mexico or China? Are they, you know, put off by just other things that might be beyond the cultural aspects? Could they be reached so that we can isolate the real extremists, the real haters, and at least get some kind of dialogue going? What does anybody think?
I have to say, Phil, my thoughts. Okay, so stepping back to Fox News, I have to like seriously just call bullshit on just that on so many different levels,
Yeah.
because them comparing the Black Lives Matter stuff to what happened yesterday is like so much like night and day. Because specifically, yes, there were looting and stuff happening during the Black Lives Matter, and I'm not in condoning that at all, but going back to what Harry stated at his conversation when he first started, the stuff that the people yesterday were complete just throwing out the window was the you know, the stuff that they were saying they were fighting for democracy and all of that. They were going against 200 plus traditions that was sitting in that building. And yes, you know, the Black Lives Matters had people that were, you know, in the mix of their riots and in the mix of their, you know, peaceful protests, you know, on some things, and they were looting businesses and different things like that. But the folks yesterday was in a building, was in places where history within America has happened, and we were on stage for the whole world to see, and it was an embarrassment. We had world leaders that were commenting and saying, like, I can't believe that this is happening. You talk about democracy. Our military goes and fight in other countries and try to uphold democracy and say this shouldn't happen. But over here on our soil, we gave a blatant disrespect, stage presence of some straight foolery. And for her to make the comparison to Black Lives Matter, that's a whole nother conversation that just Fox News and all the people that believe that way, you can't even compare that. You cannot compare that at all. So in terms of, you know, your question about civic engagement and how can we engage in conversation, yeah, there are some people that we can still reach, that can still, because I don't think everybody is lost, but a good majority of those folks, I'm not going to waste my time and energy because they're not trying to hear it. They're so caught up in their self-pity. And it's also, I think, because Trump made a lot of promises to a lot of those people in those factories, in those rural areas, saying that we're going to bring the jobs back, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. He did not hold up to his side of the agreement, and that's what they're pissed off. But he's also presenting the lies and saying, oh, it's the migrants that are coming in, it's the Black folks that's doing that. No, you need to turn the mirror on yourself. You've made these promises as a politician to these people, and you do not uphold those promises.
I got to tell you, Phil, Angela hit some serious stuff. And you know, when you talked about your son, and I'm sure he's a super intelligent man, especially if he's raised by you. But I'm gonna say this. When I have to answer your question about the civic engagement, once again, there's two things we can do. Number one, we have to take a proactive approach and learn from Stacey Abrams. Her mission to help Georgia was 2 years out. So make no mistake to all Americans and all our Georgians. I don't know how you say it. Georgians, you know, Georgians, thank you. That what she did was a 2-year mission that had a level of consistency that was paramount. So in our own communities, I've done it even at my church, which I consider this is a part of the world I can help control. Did voter registration, mentioned voter registration, told people about job fairs, told people about areas they can go to for early voting. And if you had questions about, you know, what issues you have in relation to getting your IDs for voting or absentee ballots, all that proactive stuff shows community engagement. And it's very reminiscent of what our ancestors in the civil rights movement did. So that's number one. Number two, what you can do based upon what your son said, hey, Dad, y'all not listening to everything that Trump says. What I do with conversations such as that, I say, well, what is it that you care about, right? Because it's been my experience that some of the youth, they're worried about, okay, am I gonna have a job after college? And if so, how much are my student loans gonna be? And how can I pay them? If that's what you care about, you ask them, does this president or does our president or does any president speak to that? You might have another individual that's big on blue collar. I know up here in Baltimore, when I came to Baltimore almost 20 years ago, the big thing back in the day was Bethlehem Steel. Now Bethlehem Steel is gone. Well, that was blue collar stuff. Well, back in the day, it was not uncommon for an uncle, a brother, and a father to all be in the same factory. So when you start talking about unions, you start talking about blue collar jobs, you start talking about federal credit unions with and also union rights. Well, you're saying, hey, if that's what you care about, does your leader speak to that? Once you identify what they care about, the conversation does not have to be generic. Because I think the problem is people get very confrontational because they're getting the tale of two worlds with the president. This overly radical conversation that you're like, why'd you say that? And then number two, when he takes a stand on something, it's like, well, I'm so clouded about how bad you talked about women and how bad you talked about Black folks and how bad you talked about folks in the community that are trying to just have a better life that I can't even listen to when you're trying to talk about something of substance. So that's what's happened. When you have divisive conversation, it's hard for people to get to a place of normalcy to talk about the issues. So what I do when I hear someone who may not be divisive, I consider them being unsure. I ask them, well, what is it that you care about? Because you'll be surprised. Many people can't give you specifics on what they care about.
Right,
Well,
right.
It's true. It's true. You know, it's easy to say like what specific issue concerns you. And some people might just say, or might even not even say it to you explicitly, I guess, but if they're having a crappy life, if something in their personal lives is going on, and that just affects their general worldview. And, you know, there's been some talk about this, that some people supported Trump out of this general nihilism of like, you know, well, you know, I'm not happy with my life. I'm not happy with what I see. And I'm just going to, you know, do this, burn the damn thing down and all that. And by the same token, I think, and I've said this before in this podcast, I do think that of the 70 million people who voted for Trump, some of them were just so like sort of narrowly focused that they said, well, you know, the economy's doing well. I'm doing well. You know, I had a raise. I'm paying for your taxes, blah, blah, blah. That's what matters to me. And so, you know, I don't care about all this other stuff. It's a complicated thing.
It is, Phil. It is. And I'll say this just because it's on my mind. I know that there are Republican Party members that have said they do not agree with Trump. So let me say that. I know folks who are Republican and say, man, I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he said that. So we have to say that as well, because I think what has happened is turned into Superman versus Lex Luthor. You got a couple people on the Superman side, you got a couple people on the Lex Luthor side, and really, it's not that. It's we on the same side. There's some stuff about both sides I don't like, but make no mistake, just because I'm a Republican doesn't mean I like Trump, or just because I'm a Democrat doesn't mean I like Trump. You got those conversations.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a weird mix. So we have to say that, because I don't want people to think that at some point, even we're saying, hey, well, everybody who was Republican was for everything Trump did, which isn't true. Because if that was the case, Biden wouldn't have won.
Exactly.
Right, Biden wouldn't have won. Biden won because there was some Republicans said, man, I'm not with this. I'm going in D. I'm going in drive. I'm not going in reverse. Which I took that from Obama. I'm not going to quote like I used it. Okay. And then there were some Democrats that said, look, man, this is a mess. And there were some Republicans that said that this was a mess, and that's why Obama won.
Yes.
So make no mistake, Obama won because Republicans were driving in D, and Democrats were driving in D. So I just want to tell her that. So
and even you know, this I have to say this. And thank you for that. The guy who stood up to Trump in Georgia.
Yes.
You know,
Rattensberger.
and his elections manager. And even in Arizona, there were Republicans. And in the Senate, I think Mitt Romney has been very, very vocal about it, despite the fact that some of the members of his family are supporting Trump. This is a very interesting thing. I just think, to your point, Phil, earlier, that what do we do? I just think to speak to the economic issues, number one, I don't believe that it is just the issue of economy that made some people vote for Trump, because a lot of his supporters are not even you know, the guys who run around the country. Where do they get the money to run around the country?
They're not in the same bracket at all.
Exactly. And who actually has benefited most from his policies? They are very wealthy people. But it is important for the incoming administration to go bold, because if you get stagnant and unable to do anything like Obama was, likely due to a Mitch, Moscow Mitch. If you're in that situation, then you're going to have a lot of disappointment. So to ensure that you don't have a lot of disappointment, you have to go big in terms of your policies, your programs, economic policies. I think that will go a long way in ameliorating some of those issues. But at the same time, in terms of our culture, the media plays a huge, huge role. And so, and it's difficult now to know what is the media. It's no longer the legacy newspapers and TV stations. These days, it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's the Twitter, and some of this social media. So how do you deal with this situation whereby anybody can say anything, anybody can, and Trump is just a manifestation of that. You can say anything, whether wrong or right. You can, and then you have these people who are conspiracy theorists, and they are actually helping make this country much, much, much worse in terms of division. So I think the media has to take a stock of their role in what is going on in this culture of management society and culture of vilification, so that we lose this touch of our common humanity.
You know, I Phil, I have to agree with George with the media, because and I have to say this, and Angela, I swear I made this up. It just came to my mind. We have to look at ratings versus reality. We really do. One thing I learned when I did martial arts as a kid one of my teachers, he told me something. He said, Harry, when you fight somebody, it's not the fight you have to worry about, it's tomorrow. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, if you win, what's gonna happen tomorrow? Which I came up with my own philosophy. What's the first rule in fighting? Don't fight, right? And if you do fight, you know, you have to find the ways to fight. So when we have a media outlets, as George depicted, that are fighting for ratings, they literally have to say, when we do this, what's gonna happen tomorrow? They have to, because in their fight to compete with each other and to get the news first, or to be the ones to report something new, are they hurting our democracy? And that is the tale of the tape. For me, when I saw Twitter shut down the president's Twitter page, you saw the power of the media. It stopped.
It stopped.
They did exactly what my martial arts instructor taught me. Think about tomorrow. Because if we don't stop it now, he may put out more tweets that are gonna hurt us today and tomorrow. And because of that, others followed. Now, can you imagine what might have happened if the divisiveness that he was exhibiting was stopped by the media the same way it was stopped yesterday? We might not have ever had the issue of the folks marching up to Capitol Hill. We might not have ever had the issues of him talking bad about anybody. But my point is, George is right. If we don't hold our leadership and media accountable and don't give them the tools to say, hey, let's look at ratings versus reality. If we do this, what's going to happen tomorrow? Until we have that conversation with those individuals, the conversations that we have here are powerful and paramount. But if it doesn't reach them, it's all for nothing.
No, I think a couple of things. I think that, listen, this is an effort. I agree with you, Harry and George. I think, and this is an effort I think that's going to have to be kind of a grassroots from the ground up thing. You can't literally shut down Twitter and Facebook. You know, you can't hold Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg off to jail or whatever and, you know, destroy their operations. You can't censor. I mean, you can kind of pressure them into doing the kind of selective, for want of a better word, censorship that they did in locking down Trump's account. But ultimately, I think it's going to be, it's almost like a parallel with the environment, you know, like, yes, we need strong government action. We're looking forward to getting more of that when Biden takes office. But there are individual decisions that we can make every day to recycle, to use, you know, certain elements rather than others. And I think with social media, it's the same thing. You know, I'm not on Twitter. I'm barely on Facebook. And when I am, I'm not like, you know, it's more like saying, hey, that's a nice picture of your dog or something like that. You know,
Right.
once in a while, I'll post a petition only if it's something that I think will make a difference. Like, you know, tell your congressman to vote this way, not recirculating some conspiracy theory or just some like ad hominem attack on people that I don't like. And I've seen other people who agree with me politically do that kind of thing. And I look at it and I say, what's the point? It makes you feel good to say that. Is it going to change anybody's mind? You know, to quote President Obama, he said a couple of years ago, like, don't waste time arguing with strangers on the internet. So I think if we do that kind of thing in our own relation to social media and encourage other people to do the same thing, you know, especially younger people, we can make some progress that way. But I want to, because we don't have a lot of time left, you know, looking ahead to the future here, talking about the fact that we now are going to have a Congress where technically the Democrats are the majority, but it's not a huge majority in the House. And in the Senate, we have basically a 50-50 tie with votes broken by Kamala Harris. And, you know, some hopeful pundits have written about this is going to force our leaders to work together, that they can't do as much grandstanding, that if they want to get anything at all done, they have to reach out to the other side. There's been talk about the power of, you know, moderates in both parties, your Lisa Murkowski's, your Joe Manchins, this kind of thing. Now, Harry, as somebody who has 15 years of experience in government, and as you alluded before, you did work with Republicans, you know, and you realize that they're not all terrible people. Are you optimistic? Do you think that this setup is going to bring more progress going forward? What do you think?
The answer is yes. My faith teaches me that given the opportunity, a person will dig inside and do what they can to help one another. They will. I think we saw that last night where there were Republicans who were like, look, we're not gonna validate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's win. But when they came into the chamber, they gave speeches that I thought I would never see. Mm-hmm. I mean, I thought, and it was at 8 o'clock at night when Chicago PD and Chicago Fire was supposed to be on. And that's my show. That's my show now. And I was glued as if I was watching one of my favorite shows because I was in shock. And so, because I love people and I believe in people and I believe in the Congress of the United States, and my mentor, who's no longer here with us, Congressman Cummings, believed in people and loved people and worked across the aisle. I saw him do it and I saw it work. I would be a fool today to say that I am overly optimistic that we would have a productive, constructive, and fun. It's gonna be fun administration. I really do. I think we're gonna be excited. I'm seeing more people that of color, of diversity in the president's cabinet. I'm seeing people, a couple of them I used to walk down the hallways and see, and like, wow, you up there, congratulations. And because I know their work ethic, I know what they'll bring. So yes, Phil, I am optimistic, and I think this is. I wish I made the film, but I didn't get the money. This is Return of the Jedi, so we're good. We're good.
Oh God, seriously.
We're good.
Oh my God, really?
I love Star Wars, Angela.
Oh my God. Yeah, let's not
I love Star Wars. Come on now.
Let's not have that conversation. Phil, I would have to say I am very much optimistic, and especially I was a little worried, but I have much hope in the younger generation and what they're doing, and the fact that they're utilizing the resources that they have to push the pendulum forward, especially like with those that took to TikTok and other elements and changed a lot of things that has happened within our structure. I also believe that there needs to be they need to take a look at some antiquated things that has happened within our system. Yes, democracy and everything is important and is what America is built on, but we are moving forward, and they need to update some things to be in the times that we're in. So I'm very much optimistic. I believe that, things are going to get better with this new administration. I know they have a lot of cleaning up to do, and it's not going to happen in just the one term, but I'm very much proud to say, and even though yesterday would probably say differently, but I'm proud to say that I'm an American. I'm proud to say, that I believe in what I know my ancestors have fought for, what my family members that are in the military, what they believe in. So I'm very much happy about what's going to happen within the upcoming years.
George, your thoughts?
I really want to be optimistic. And I don't know whether it is a misplaced optimism, just because history teaches us something really, really interesting, which is that once a virginity has been broken, it becomes very difficult to patch it up. And I am optimistic because of the person that Joe Biden is, and perhaps Kamala Harris. I think they're people who love people. Particularly Joe Biden loves people. And so he's going to set the right tone, as Colin Powell said this morning. It's not going to be like the other one. And yet, I don't think the fever in the Republican Party has been broken yet. I think that example of badness remains. It's just not going to be ubiquitous. And there are people within the Republican Party who are still in Congress who are not, they haven't got the message yet. You know, there is this thing that American exceptionalism, it has always been an issue. It was predicated on the fact that a lot of bad things have happened outside that haven't happened in the United States. But I think this also has taught us something, that there's, not only is life so fragile, but also culture is fragile. You can change culture by doing what you're doing consistently, and people get used to it. And in 4 years, people nearly got used to what he was doing. In the end, they didn't get used to it, which is why they kicked him out. But if he continues outside of government with his Twitter, and he continues to have that firm grip on the Republican Party, and people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz are allowed to go with him, unless you really banish them completely, it is something that will continue to regenerate perhaps years later, because the problems that we see today were there during the Reconstruction. So his history keeps on repeating itself. And I guess to continue to exist is to continue to be positive and to be hopeful. And so I'm hopeful, but it's a hopefulness that is tinged with stars.
Yeah, no, I couldn't. I would agree with that sentiment, George. That's kind of how I'm feeling, or cautiously optimistic, or however you want to call it. But let me just conclude, because speaking of history, just a little historical note here. 95 years ago in Atlanta, a Jewish factory owner named Leo Frank was accused of raping and murdering a teenage girl who worked in his factory. Before his trial could be completed, a mob broke into the jail where he was being held and lynched him. This basically, everyone agreed, every historian agrees, had a great deal to do with the fact that he was a Northerner and a Jew. Now, yesterday in Atlanta, in Georgia, a Jewish man, John Ossoff, is elected to the United States Senate. I'm a Jew. We are a minority in this country, really everywhere outside of Israel. And I know he could not have been elected without the votes of a great many Christians, Black and white, Asian Americans, Latinos, you name it. People who were not Jewish did not see him as any kind of a threat or any kind of evil. They voted for him. And, you know, I hold on to something like that and I say, okay, optimistic, whatever, cautiously optimistic, things do change. Things do improve. They don't improve themselves. They improve by the efforts of many, many people working together, changing minds, communicating, organizing, and so forth. But they do change. They can change. And it's that kind of thread that, you know, keeps me going and keeps me hopeful. But as you say, cautiously optimistic. So on that note, thank you all. This has been a really, really enlightening discussion. And I thank you all. I'm sorry. So thank you again. And please join us for another episode of Cultural Road week next. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. Again, thanks to our guest, Harry Spikes. Thank you, George and Angela. Happy New Year again. And
thank you.
Take care.